Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers. And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 16, Episode 120. He's Dave Bryan. I'm Alex Kozora, SteelersDepot.com. Thanks for being back with us this Wednesday, Steelers Nation. And Dave, happy final pre-draft visitor day to all of those who celebrate the Pittsburgh Steelers bringing in the final 2026 prospects to the South Side, the UPMC Sports Rooney Complex facility for final visits. We know one name. We have one name to go, so I'd love to hear your guesses on that. And how you doing?
All right. Happy Wednesday. And yes, I am celebrating last day of pre-draft visitor day of 2026. And I'm ecstatic that that it looks like we might get this thing rounded out to all 30. And just using it as a topic to start with, man, you go around, you're on Twitter as much as I am, and obviously searching the internet and doing pre-draft work and all like that. You look around the NFL and try to look at who's visiting who. Say what you will about, obviously Mike McCarthy and Omar Khan only going to, the one pro day this year, but we are a little bit spoiled still because how many teams around the NFL other than those ones, I guess, that do the giant local, I guess, pro days, and even those aren't full 30 lists because it includes local visits and all. But I mean, how many teams around, or how many fan bases around the NFL go into the draft knowing all 30 pre-draft visitors? So
you tell me. If you're searching around it, sounds like it's uncommon.
Yeah, it's very, very uncommon there. So the fact that the Steelers, who are really kind of, don't give out a lot of information, overall in some areas, especially, look, I mean, they don't do live coordinator press conferences during the season, and those kind of things drives us mad. But I mean, it means a lot, especially with this new coaching staff and all like that. And we've been spoiled over the years. I mean, hadn't been many years since this site started in 2008 that, we haven't built out at least probably to the 75% level when it comes to pre-draft visitors. So I'm ecstatic at the very least that, we should know the 30th visitor here, either by the time we get off the show or soon thereafter, that at the very least we'll have a full pre-draft visitor list to go by. So I'm happy.
Me too. It's really important with the new coaching staff that was going to stay, and we were going to know all the names, which we've known for years now. But anytime there's a new, even partial regime coming in, you never know how things get, how transparent things are or sometimes aren't. And so that's important, especially given the other lack of pre-draft information, the lack of pro day traveling. To have that 30 list is critical.
Absolutely, it is.
All right, Dave, let's start talking about who the latest names on that list is. And let's start with the other day. I don't believe we got to it during the show. I think it was right on Monday where Pittsburgh brought in Germie Bernard, the Alabama wide receiver, Taylen Green, the Arkansas quarterback. Those names were known that they were going to come in at some point. The new name to the list was Utah offensive lineman Spencer Fano, arguably the top-rated and highest value prospect that Pittsburgh had brought in up until that point, a likely first-round candidate. Some discussion about, is he a tackle, which is what he played at Utah, primarily right tackle, but spent a season on the left side, or could he kick inside to guard? So Pittsburgh looking at a very highly touted offensive lineman on Monday.
Yeah, that threw me for a little bit of a loop because of the fact that, I think throughout this pre-draft process, you've seen Spencer Fano pretty much, not, people have him as their top tackle on the board. In fact, I think Brandon Thorne, who I know you and I both respect his work, does a great deal of work on offensive linemen and defensive linemen. That's sort of his specialty, and edge rushers and all. And I think he calls him his best offensive lineman in this class, period, overall. And the fact, the conversation, at least the polarizing aspect when it comes to Fano, are is the arm length when it comes to him, and he is a little bit on the slight side, but and then also the fact that he's most people have him as a right tackle in the NFL, and even though sides don't matter as much as they used to, left tackles seem to still hold the most water, especially when it comes to early rounds of the draft overall. But it obviously, and we'll talk about it in a little bit here, Vega Ioane from Penn State came in the following day there, and that eased some nerves a little bit there. But when you're looking at first round prospects that the Steelers had brought in up until the other day, you had to start, at least in the back of your head, I know I did, start figuring out, well, what happens if maybe, Vega doesn't come in, and obviously it looks like Omar Cooper Jr. is not going to come in at this point. I think he's visiting with the 49ers today, so he's not going to be on the top 30 list. You start carving out the visitors that are on the top 30 list, and then those that are potential first round draft picks there up until Vega came in. I found myself trying to think, well, would the Steelers really, if Fano was to drop, would they really consider him as potential a tackle first, or with the idea of potentially moving him, kicking him inside? And once again, the arm length is a big question with him. I know Spencer has had a little bit of I think when you look at his tape, dealing with edge rushers, especially the speedy ones and the higher profile ones that can win on the edge, how's that come into play there? I do think his character. I went back and watched a couple of his interviews going all the way back to the combine and pro day. There's not a lot not to like. I think this guy was a captain as well. He has NFL bloodlines to go along with it. And I found myself trying to, I guess, I don't want to say talk myself into it, but trying to figure out, is he a slam dunk potential first round candidate, especially if no other first round, kind of guys came in there. But he is going to be an interesting conversation once the draft gets under. Talking about Spencer, when the draft gets underway, do teams really legitimately think he can be a right tackle in the league with the arm length, especially with all that stuff coming out about who was it? Will
Campbell in the
yeah,
postseason?
yeah, Will Campbell, and you go all the way back to who was it the Titans?
Skoronski?
Yeah, Skoronski, and the short arm conversation with him and all like that. So he, once again, I think if you go back to what Brandon Thorne had to say about him, he says, I don't care where you put him, guard. And I think even Spencer at the combine talked to Stacey Dales and even did some reps at center during the combine as well too. But if you want a guy that checks a lot of boxes for the Steelers, except for maybe where might you play him, I think Spencer Fano checks all those boxes there. But there's no way to get around the fact that he didn't play any guard at college. He was primarily a right tackle. He did spend a little time at left tackle, and then there's the whole arm conversation when it goes along with him. But I was just re-emphasizing, I was a bit surprised to see them bring him in, and it would make for an interesting conversation should Fano drop for whatever reason, and maybe Vega goes off the board, and maybe some of these other first rounders that we kind of have penciled in as being prospects for the Steelers go off the board. Would the Steelers really take Spencer at 21, and what would they do with him if they did take him?
All good questions, and we've seen linemen drop to Pittsburgh before. DeCastro, more than a decade ago. Fautanu was not expected to fall to Pittsburgh whenever he fell to them in 2024. We've seen Pittsburgh invest heavily in the offensive line, and that trend may continue. Fano was the Outland Trophy Award winner in 2025, given to
That's
the
another box.
NCAA's top offensive lineman. He's got 35 career starts despite not even turning 22 until November. So he's got experience and youth, always attractive to Pittsburgh. He's got good overall size at 6'5.5", 311. The arm length is the conversation point that you mentioned. At the combine, he came in 32 and 1/8 inches, having most people think, okay, he's probably going to shift inside to guard. At his pro day, arms remeasured, came in at 32 and 7/8 inches, so almost a full inch longer, and that makes some think maybe he'll play tackle or could stick at offensive tackle, where Pittsburgh would plan to play him remains to be seen. Would it be left tackle? Would it be left guard? Those would likely be one of those two spots. Our Tom Mead noted his flashes as a run blocker, athleticism, overall really good profile, grip strength and pass pro, but wondered about his overall play strength in the run game. Is that good enough? And can he be more technical with his punch? Tom thinks he's much better at tackle than he is at guard because if he kicks inside, plays in that phone booth with a lack of overall functional strength, will that hurt him? That was sort of Tom's takeaway, but opinions will vary on where he plays and where Fano fits best.
Yeah, I mean, let's suppose the Steelers did draft him. What in the first round, 21st overall. Where do you think he starts off at?
If I had to guess, and the team's been a bit funny in the past, not always predicting where they plan to play these guys, I would say left guard. When you have such an obvious hole there, when you have a potentially, hopefully healthy for training camp Broderick Jones and Dylan Cook, do you need to add Fano also to that mix out of the gate? When you have weaker talent and competition at left guard, Spencer Anderson, Brock Hoffman, to me, that's where Fano slides in and makes the most sense in terms of fitting into Pittsburgh.
Could you put him at left guard and then switch Mason McCormick? Put him at right guard and then move Mason McCormick over to left guard.
I hate moving two guys to solve one problem, and I like the chemistry that McCormick and Fautanu and Frazier have. I think that center to right side is aces. I wouldn't touch it. Could you do it and make it work? Sure, but why project out even more? Because Fano's not even played right guard before, but maybe less of a transition, so I understand that mentality, but then you're banking on McCormick and his, even though it's his old spot playing left guard in college, it's just too much moving around unless you just didn't love the idea of, Jones and a rookie Fano playing together or Cook and Fano playing together and you wanted McCormick over there instead and then Fano on the right side for, with Fautanu and Frazier kind of bookending him. You could talk yourself into it that way, but I like just moving one guy to fill one spot.
I tell you, the further you go down the rabbit hole researching this kid, he was a captain too, I think. Now he did play in kind of an RPO heavy scheme overall, but I don't know how much you want to ding him for that. But this is as clean of a prospect.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you talk about not only just NFL period in the draft, but when you talk about the Steelers specifically, this is as clean of a prospect that matches up with what the Steelers look for outside of where the hell are you going to play him,
Yeah, I mean, this guy checks all the boxes. Like you said, he's got bloodlines. He has 4 uncles who played in the NFL. His brother, Logan Fano, is a teammate at Utah, a potential day 3 draft pick. He played through a shoulder injury in 2025. Spencer did. And so there's not, on profile, you like everything about this kid.
Right. Now, before the once that, obviously the next set of visitors, a lot of discussion be had there, but up until yesterday and the pre-draft visitor list coming out, did you find yourself starting to question how might one factor in Spencer Fano possibly at 21st overall?
When you say factor in, what do you mean by that in terms of him likely being the pick?
Yeah, given he came in and did you even toy with the idea that this might be a guy that you have to seriously consider as the first round draft pick in a mock?
No, before he came in, he really wasn't on my radar at all in terms of being under consideration for Pittsburgh at 21. Now that he's come in for the visit, of course, he's going to be part of that pool of candidates. So yes, it definitely changed.
But not before, obviously. But once he hit the list there, I found myself doing more research than I already knew on him. That's for sure.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that's natural whenever these names and these headline names, potential first round picks come in. So we already mentioned Bernard and Green, talked about those guys
Mhm.
before. Bernard, well built, well rounded player, good route runner, smart, bit of manufactured touches at Alabama, but can run the whole route tree. Doesn't wow you athletically, never going to be that elite number one receiver, but a solid prospect in his own right. Likely day two pick. So Pittsburgh does not take a receiver at 21. They take one at, say, 53 in the second round. That's where you could see Germie Bernard be a target.
Yeah, if you're putting a mock together and you don't have the Steelers drafting a wide receiver in round one, he's definitely got to be in your. And look, I mean, they've only brought in, let's see, what Caldwell, Kendrick Law, Denzel Boston, Germie Bernard, Skylar Bell, and Makai Lemon for pre-draft visits. That's a pretty good list overall, but only only a few of those are potentially going to be second round type guys. I would be quite surprised if Bernard went in the first round. So yeah, and this is a guy as we talked about. He's over 6 foot. It would have been interesting had he completed his full athletic testing profile throughout the pre-draft process, because had he done so, it's very likely he would have checked all the boxes along with the who was it Antonio Williams, right?
Yeah, to Clemson, he checked every
Right,
box. Yep.
right. So, yeah, this is a guy that ever since we, especially dating back as far as, I mean, he's been scheduled to come in. How long we had him as a potential visitor for? Like 2.5 weeks or something like that.
Couple weeks. He had said on an interview, I think in late March, that he was scheduled to come into Pittsburgh in April.
All right, so definitely a guy to pay attention to when you're putting your mocks together, because he could potentially be, especially if the Steelers don't draft a wide receiver in round one, he could be the pick in round two, I would imagine.
And then Taylen Green, an interesting name, one of the freakiest combine workouts by a quarterback in combine history. He ran 4.37. He jumped out of the gym. He's, a unique body type. Dude's almost 6'6", a leaner build, but big arm, great athlete. The questions about consistency, pocket presence, and just a kind of roller coaster tape when you watch him. And that gives him more of the project label. But the thing that gives me additional pause with Green compared to, say, a Cole Payton from North Dakota State, a similar project as Green has started 46 career games at Boise State originally, then transferred to Arkansas. So how many bad habits are sort of ingrained in him? How much can his game grow? That's the thought and the concern. But Green, a really exciting athlete at his best there, Dave.
Yeah, I think probably fourth, fifth round is somewhere where he comes off the board. Really, really the best athletic profile just in general when it comes to players in this year's draft class, for the size and the build and the speed and everything along with that. One of the thinking what 23 and a half years old at this point. A lot of we went through the Bill Parcells 7 things, and I think he was one of those ones that checked a lot of them, checked all, I think all the boxes, wasn't he? Didn't we say that as
There were a
far as
couple of them. I forget
yeah,
who, but he probably checks the list being a
right,
senior.
right. So, definitely not a, year one starter, gonna need some development along the way here, but he's another one that we've known is gonna be coming in for a while and finally did come in.
And then on Tuesday, Pittsburgh bringing in 3 more, and let's discuss the elephant in the room here, Dave. And Vega Ioane coming in, the Penn State offensive guard, the best interior prospect in this year's class. And that buzzing sound you're hearing is Dave levitating off the ground as he heard that news. So, Dave, you got your wish. Ioane came in for a visit.
Yeah, look, I started to get worried there as the list dwindled down, and we were down to, I guess, at that point, 5 visitors to go, 5 slots yet to go. You were starting to wonder maybe, and I wasn't alone. I know a lot of listeners were wondering too if they'd bring him in. It's it is a Captain Obvious type situation now that he has come in, that he should be considered as a first round draft pick. The big question now at this point is is Vega going to fall to 21st overall? You're starting to see a lot of those same conversations that you saw with David DeCastro many moons ago when he came out of Stanford. Oh, there's no way he drops. But as I always say, and for the last several years, man, interior linemen, for whatever reason, seem to get pushed down a little bit. You don't see many of them go in the first round in general overall. We've talked about the Ravens potentially liking him. I know some people have thrown out the Buccaneers as a potential of being drafted or drafting Vega ahead of Pittsburgh at 21st overall. It seems like the Buccaneers are a lot more stable at both of their guard spots. However, I still stand, and I think some people are trying to link, I think, Miami potentially to Vega. I still consider the Baltimore Ravens as the biggest obstacle. What did we say they are? 14th, I think,
14th overall.
overall. That might be the biggest obstacle when it comes to Vegas sliding the rest of the way down potentially to 21. Now, we have talked a little bit about, I threw out the whole Patrick Queen trade idea, maybe with Dallas and all, but there are other potential trade partners. Look, I think you can make somewhat of an argument. Looking at the Rams situation, who are one pick ahead of the Ravens, could you potentially go up that high to go get a guy like Vega? But I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to be the guy that's going to sit here and say there's no way Vega slides to 21. I'm not going to be that guy. Now, if stranger things have happened, could other teams go up and go get a guy like Vega who have a need for a left guard? But I don't think the Steelers are just going to bring him in just as a cordial visit. I think this is a guy they seriously have been targeting as a potential first round draft pick. I think there's probably now they'll have to map out their own mock drafts and say, do we like him enough, and are we convinced enough that he's not going to fall down to 21st overall where we go up and get him? But when you look at the way this list is rounding out to this point, and once again, we know for a fact at this point that Omar Cooper Jr. is not going to be on the 30 on the list of 30 pre-draft visitors at this point. I don't know how you don't consider Vega as potentially being very high probability of the Steelers' first round pick, one way or the other. Either they go up and get him, or they stand pat at 21 and he falls down to him.
Sure, you have to consider him, and consider him strongly. Talk about plug and play left guard. He's got 32 career starts against great competition. He's got size, he's got power, enough athleticism. Not his marquee trait. It really is kind of the phone booth blocking and just overall his strength and ability to drive people, move them from point A to point B, and his overall experience. That's the calling card with Ioane. So, would Pittsburgh trade up? How often do teams trade up for guards? Not that often, I
Right.
would guess. Pittsburgh, in some cases, have let linemen fall to them, like DeCastro, like Fauton. Of course, they went up and made a small move to get Broderick Jones. They wanted to jump the Jets, who were a team that very much could have taken Broderick Jones had he been available. So could that scenario play out again where they make a small move to jump ahead of a team they feel like at 19 or 18 or somewhere around there that might threaten and take this guy? But very much on the short list just by the natural virtue of him being a first round candidate. And then probably even above that because he's a great system scheme fit and seeing Pittsburgh invest, like I mentioned, so heavily in offensive line. Maybe that trend stops, but it certainly could continue. It's worked out well so far. That's been a really clear path and philosophy under Omar Khan and Andy Weidel. Weidel himself, a former offensive lineman, that we're going to build up the trenches and make that unit really strong. And if we can do that, the rest sort of falls into place.
Right. Absolutely. So, yeah, I was excited to see him come in, obviously.
Right. So that certainly is a big name and a big box check there for Ioane. And then also on Tuesday, Pittsburgh bringing in Beau Stephens, a guard from Iowa, and Will Kacmarek, a tight end from Ohio State. So if Pittsburgh does not take a guard in round one for whatever reason, really feels like early day two because they brought in so many of those day two types of offensive linemen. Stephens probably a day two kid, maybe more third round than second round, but likely a Friday night selection.
Yeah, it feels like the guards on this list, and it all depends on what you classify Fano as. Most people, obviously, for obvious reasons, have him as a tackle. But Keelan Rutledge, obviously not going to be a first-round guy, at least you don't think. And then Beau Stephens, unequivocally, is not a first-round guy. A little bit shorter arms on him, but does come out of that Iowa system. That would make a lot of sense if, for whatever reason, the Steelers don't go guard or go Vega specifically. It feels like in the first round that one of those two guys would be high on their list as early as the second round.
Yeah, now was he more left guard or right guard at Iowa Stevens? I think he was playing more left guard, right?
Right. I think he's one of the true 24 at left guard, 10 at right guard, but the last 2 seasons I think has predominantly been at left guard for him. So I think he's one of the few upper ranked true left guards in this draft class.
Okay, and a high school wrestler. And Pittsburgh loves those wrestling backgrounds. Zach Frazier was a dominant high school wrestler. I don't know how successful Stevens was, but he did wrestle in high school and kind of credits that to his offensive lineman, how he approaches playing offensive line. Now, our scouting report on Stevens was pretty negative. I think we're pretty low on him compared to others, but I've not dug into the tape too much on Stevens himself, myself watching him, going through my scouting report on Beau Stephens. So he's experienced, he's tough, he's, a stocky body at 6'5.5", 315, lacks length at 31 and an eighth, but team leader, he's got good play strength and could be a guy that certainly will be part of that competition with Anderson and Hoffman should Stevens be the pick.
Yeah, Joe Moore Award winner last season. Once again, 13 starts at left guard last season. First team All Big Ten last year, and even after his injury in 2023, early in the season, came back and started and played all 11 games. Missed 2 games with the injury in 2024, but was voted Iowa's comeback player of the year as well too. So if this team misses once again on Vega in round 1, it feels like Stevens would be in the conversation. I don't know what. I see Brugler has him as the 4th or 5th round. You probably have to get him probably at the end of the 3rd if you wanted to for sure get him at that point. But the fact that they brought him in, I think, speaks volumes, and it does feel more of a backup plan if this team isn't able to get Vega or unable to get Rutledge, say maybe in round 2.
Yeah, round 3, one of those three third-round picks, probably the ticket for Steven. 0 sacks allowed last year, also 0 penalties, and Pittsburgh's offensive line was the cleanest unit last year, so that may endear themselves to Beau Stephens. The final name brought in Tuesday was Will Kacmarek, the tight end out of Ohio State, lightly used last year with the Buckeyes. 15 catches for 168 yards and 2 touchdowns. Began his career at Ohio and then transferred up to Ohio State. Good size, about to turn 23. Actually, he turned 23 in February, 6'5.5", 261. And so we see with him and Marlon Klein, these Big Ten tight ends that have size and could step in and be more day one ready.
This team's drafting a blocking tight end at some point. It feels like, and you got a couple of guys in on pre-draft visits now, and Marlon Klein out of Michigan, and then Kacmarek out of Ohio State that make a lot of sense for what the Steelers look for, maybe in those middle rounds, maybe early day 3, somewhere along those lines there. So if you're going to put a tight end, obviously in your mock draft at this point, those are 2 great names to have to choose from, and I would be excited with either one of them, to be honest with you.
Yeah, our profile has Kacmarek as more of a zone beater, an average athlete, which is borne out by the testing of 4'7", 440. Good jump at 36-inch vertical, but kind of a more linear athlete, going to settle versus zone. Has some strength as a blocker, needs to probably clean up technique a little bit, but kind of a well-rounded, average everywhere, not deficient in any one aspect that makes him a good number 3 type of tight end.
Yep, it'd be interesting to see maybe, and we'll know by the end of the show or soon thereafter if maybe one more tight end is brought in, kind of a maybe a mid round guy. I don't know, Eli Raridan out of Notre Dame, Nate Bo Kircher out of Texas A&M could be potential candidates, but it certainly at this point. It feels like, and look, they need it. They lost Connor Hayward. They've got obviously two tight ends, and Pat Fryermuth and Darnell Washington. It would make a lot of sense for this team to spend a early day three or day three in period pick on a tight end. So good name to have in the building there in Will Kacmarek.
And then for Wednesday, there were two spots left. One has been reportedly spoken for, not made official, but we assume it's going to be true. In Penn State quarterback Drew Allar coming in for a visit. So a last second meeting with the Steelers. And that's four quarterbacks to have come in for visits: Carson Beck, Cole Payton, Taylen Green, and Drew Allar. Allar, once viewed as a potential first round draft pick, had a really poor 2025 and then ended with that broken ankle injury in Penn State's just disastrous season. But Allar has the look of the AFC North quarterback that Pittsburgh talks about, with great size and a live arm.
And just a couple of weeks ago when we were post the last time, I think Mike McCarthy talked and about the type of quarterbacks he's looking for, and then we went through the Bill Parcells checklist of 7. We did kind of wonder, might they round this thing out, because at that point they already had Cole Payton, Carson Beck. We knew Taylen Green was coming in. We did kind of wonder, well, based on kind of the evidence that we've seen so far, might Drew Allar end up coming in? And now it appears that that's going to be the case on the last day of pre-draft visits here. So I don't know why you bring in 4 quarterbacks for pre-draft visits if you don't have intention of drafting at least one of them. So it would be advisable to put one of those 4, I think, at this point in your mock draft, starting maybe as early as the 4th round.
I think quarterback tied for the second most of any position to come in alongside cornerback. Now, we don't know the 30th player, and so we don't know if the numbers will shift very slightly there, but 4 quarterbacks is tied for second most, only behind the 6 receivers who have come in thus far. So Allar fighting to be that third quarterback off the board. We know Mendoza will be number 1 overall. We know Ty Simpson will be the second quarterback taken. The question is, who is third? Will it be Carson Beck? Would it be Garrett Nussmeier? Could it be somebody taking a flyer on Cole Payton? Or could it be Drew Allar? And Allar probably alongside Beck, the favorites to be the third quarterback taken. The question is, who becomes the guy and where exactly does he go? Could it be third round? Some draftniks think only 2 quarterbacks will be taken through the first 2 days. And so that would leave all those guys for round 4 and beyond. I've never been a huge fan of Allar. The physical tools are certainly there. I just felt like a lot of inconsistency in his game, a lot of terrible mistakes and decision making in his game that doesn't have me feel super confident about his NFL prospects, but just from a build standpoint, certainly fits.
Look, you look at these guys that they're bringing in outside, I guess, Cole Payton. What did Mike McCarthy say? High floor, or what was his?
We never got the exact quote. It was in that scrum with just the local beat writers. There's no video
Yeah.
but McCarthy made a reference that the floor can mean more than the ceiling, where
Right.
you want somebody that's more of a known player than the upside boom bust type.
All right, so Aller, I think you'd put in that category, at least knowing where the floor is. Beck as well, and then really Taylen Green for all the starts that he's had. Cole Payton's obviously the outlier because of the amount of starts that he's had overall. So look, I wouldn't have dreamed that this team would have brought in 4 in total pre-draft visits, especially once last season ended and once it started to become at least more apparent that it sounded like Aaron Rodgers was going to come back this year. But here we are, and now I think at one point I said I'm going to have to see more, Alex. I'm going to have to see more evidence. I think this was after the Beck visit was announced or
Mm,
whatnot. I said, I'm still going to need some more evidence to think that this team might ultimately draft a quarterback this year. And here we are,
yeah.
4 weeks later, and I think I've got my evidence now at this point.
Yeah, plenty of it. And, kudos to him. He's healthy throughout the combine. And so, could there be some sort of medical aspect to the visit just to check in on him health wise? Maybe, but he seems to be overall healthy and cleared and was working out at the NFL combine. So it looks like he attacked his rehab pretty aggressively to be ready to be as active in the pre draft process as possible. So, you would again think maybe that 99th overall pick in the third round for Aller might be the sweet spot for him, but it's a little hard to read this quarterback class really past Mendoza. But then in terms of who will be the third, once you get past Ty Simpson, it's really anyone's guess.
Who's your money on being the third? Mine's on Aller.
For even taking even Pittsburgh out, just who's the third quarterback drafted overall,
Right.
is that's a question. It's Aller or Beck. Nussmeier gained some steam in this process too. I think he's kind of been able to boost his stock a little bit, but I'll say Drew Aller. I'm with you.
Okay. All right. Does that catch us up on the pre-draft visitor list at this point? While we await number 30, who might number 30 be, and what are your thoughts on Omar Cooper Jr. not being on the 30 list?
We are caught up, and I'm disappointed. I would have thought that Cooper would have been on the list, and so you wonder, does this take him out of the running to be a first round pick if they weren't at the Indiana Pro Day? There's no visit historically. It does. Do things change under Mike McCarthy? Could you do the squinting I talked about Monday and say, well, he's a really clean prospect. Pittsburgh knows him better because Adam Henry, the receivers coach, coached him in 2022. And so why put those guys in a room again just to talk the way that they've talked before? You could try to spin it that way, but obviously Cooper's chances get dinged a good amount here.
Yeah, a lot. They get dinged a lot, especially when you look at historically, because when is, going back, and sorry, you got the COVID years mixed in there, but when was the last time that the Steelers' first round draft pick did not have a head coach and GM either at their pro day, or they did not bring the kid in for a pre-draft visit?
Basically, nowhere over the last 20 years. I mean, I think we talk about, because I mean, for a while, Pittsburgh would not bring those guys in for a visit because they would go to the pro day.
All right.
Usually it was the first round pick. They would go to the pro day. They'd be bringing in the second and third round picks. That was kind of your easy guide to start mapping this thing out. That's changed under Omar Khan, where, as you mentioned before, Troy Fautanu, Derek Carmen, they weren't at those pro days, but those guys came in for visits. But to check neither box, you'd have to go back to at least, I think, '09 with Ziggy Hood, and we never found out for sure if they were at that pro day or not. That's kind of been our cutoff line. So it would be certainly unusual for anyone who did not have them, basically no Georgia kid because they're at the Georgia pro day, or anyone coming in for a visit, to be the pick, because it's just no evidence to support that.
Do you remember the specifics with Rashard Mendenhall? What happened there?
That was '08, so I think we've had that cutoff with Hood in '09. So I don't know if I've done research on the Illinois Pro Day way back when, so I
Who was
couldn't
the
tell you.
running back coach back then?
Is it Kirby
Yeah,
Wilson?
I think it was. And didn't he go to like a workout of his or something?
I have no idea.
But yeah, I mean, even 2009 with Ziggy Hood, that's quite a long time at this point. There. So
Now it is a new head coach, and in
yeah,
theory, you could sit there and say, well, they know him because of Adam Henry, and he's a clean prospect. I think Cooper is a clean prospect, but again, if you want to make it based off of evidence, there just is not much right now.
right. It would really be kind of a stop the presses, at least type of deal if Omar Cooper ended up being the pick at this point at in the first round.
So unless this 30th name is also first round pedigree and possibility, who are the first round names that could be the pick? Who's on our short list, Dave, of the 29 that we know right now?
I think Denzel Boston. I think there's a good opportunity. Now, look, Denzel Boston very well could be one of these that end up falling out of the first round. It seems A little less likely of that happening, but I think just for all practical purposes, you got to think Denzel
Hmm.
Boston's on the short list. Makai Lemon is obviously on the short list. He's going to be a first round prospect. Spencer Fano, I think, goes somewhere in the first round. Vega Ioane obviously is on that list. Boy, there's been a lot of buzz about Chris Johnson out of San
Hmm.
Diego State, man. A lot of people are convinced that he's going to be a first round guy at this point. McNeil Warren, I suppose, if you wanted to go that far, to me feels more like a second round guy, but I think I could be talked into that. And then the last one that I might need a little talking into, I think, would be Jacob Rodriguez, the linebacker out of Texas Tech.
Yeah, I would put 6. I would put all those names except for Rodriguez, who I think is going to be more early day 2. So I would say those 6 names make up the short list based on visits. And then the one pro day they attend to Georgia. Who else can we
Mhm.
put on that list from Georgia? Monroe
Freeling.
Freeling, CJ Allen. We can't discount that. He apparently worked out for scouts today and ran a 4.47 40, which was surprising based on his profile. Doesn't seem to play to that speed, but that's the reported time. How much is that being goosed up by the pro day and by agents? Probably to some degree, but Freeling, Allen, Christian Miller, probably a little too tall to put in first round, 21st overall consideration. So you got those 6 visits plus Freeling and Allen. That gets you to 8 on your short list.
Yeah, I think that's it, pending number 30 here.
Right. And assuming that history repeats itself, which it may not, we're flying a lot blinder in the McCarthy era, but we'll kind of work off that loose guideline of history until the history changes.
Exactly.
So interesting. I wish they were at more pro days, would have really opened up the
Yep.
field a little bit more, but you have 8 names that you feel like you have good evidence to suggest why they could be the first round pick based on how Pittsburgh has drafted over the last almost 20 years.
All right. At least we got the 30, or it feels like we're going to get the 30 built out all the way. So we'll find
Right.
out here in just a little bit who number 30 is. Who is your best guess at
Oh
30?
God, I knew you were going to ask.
I've gone through all the Instagram accounts this morning
I bet you have.
to try to cheat, and uh man, I can't help but keep going back to your what they look for list with Anthony Williams out of Clemson, thinking maybe he could be. What about Stribling, the wide receiver? But is he,
Yeah.
could he be, a potential guy here?
I'll make my guess now before it gets announced. I'll say a tight end to bring in a third. It's either going to be Max Clare from Ohio State or Sam Roush from Stanford. They're going to bring
All
in a
right.
third tight end. Those guys kind of fit the mold of what they've been looking for.
All right. That would potentially be a good guess. Any other, maybe, I don't know, inside linebackers they've kind of been looking at heavily here?
I mean, Josiah Trotter from
Right.
Missouri, Anthony Hill Jr. I mean, you could give up a bunch of names there. Caleb Elarms Orr's gotten some buzz. So, I mean, we could sit here and guess. We should get our answer though, hopefully during this podcast.
Yep.
But if not, then we'll talk about it on the Friday show.
All right. So there we go. Yeah, I'm just ecstatic Vega got brought in.
Yeah, I
Makes
bet
makes
you are.
things makes things a lot cleaner.
For sure, for sure. All right, Dave, I want to go through my latest mock draft here, just kind of briefly, and it starts off with the first overall pick or the 21st overall pick in round 1, Omar Cooper Jr. This was made before we kind of realized that he was not going to come in for a visit. So, will he be in my final mock draft, which will come out on Tuesday?
I'm
We shall
guessing not.
see. It seems less likely, but from the prospect standpoint, I think he's still a really good fit for Pittsburgh.
All right. Yeah. We've done a lot of talking about Omar Cooper Jr. up until this point, but it sort of feels like unless he was to fall out of the first round, that potentially they would. Maybe he becomes a candidate that you trade up into early second round there. I think Omar Cooper is easily a top 50 prospect in this year's draft class. It's hard to imagine him falling to the Steelers in the second round. I suppose stranger things have happened, but that'd be quite a surprise at this point here. But I think what's interesting here is the other one, two, three, four guys that you considered in this first spot here. Vega Ioane, Chris Johnson, Emmanuel McNeil Warren, and Denzel Boston, guys that we just talked about being on the short list there.
Yeah, some of that was just based off the pre-draft visitors, and this was written before we knew that Ioane was coming in, and so I was kind of working on the assumption that he would come in for a visit, and now he obviously has, and I think I know he's going to be in your mock draft. I guess the question is, will I put him in my final edition?
All right, Keelan Rutledge, you have in the second round. Obviously, this was once again prior to Vega coming in and prior to us not knowing whether or not Omar Cooper Jr. would come in. What do you like best about Rutledge?
He's a road grader. He's nasty. I think Pittsburgh needs some nasty. I think Zach Frazier is sort of that guy, but do they have other really nasty run blockers? I think you want to add more of that to this offensive line, a hole at left guard. He came in for a visit. He played up. He was at Middle Tennessee State, played up to Georgia Tech, had a really good Senior Bowl week. I think he has the mentality that fits Pittsburgh. He's got good feet too, basketball feet, probably better gap scheme than zone scheme. So Pittsburgh's going to be super heavy zone scheme. Then maybe Rutledge fits less. Had Arthur Smith still been the OC. Rutledge probably isn't a great schematic fit, but I think they're taking a guard day 2, if not at 21 overall, and probably sooner than later on day 2. So Rutledge fits that bill.
All right, the others that you considered in that slot: Germie Bernard, Jacob Rodriguez, and Jennings Dunker. Now, what are you going to do with Dunker if the Steelers ended up being the selection in the second round? Because this is a guy that, as we talked about, primarily a right tackle. I think he's got very, very limited guard experience, and you would think would be you're going to switch him over to the other side, like Fano and maybe left guard, or what's the plans for Dunker?
Yeah, I think he would be in the left guard mix with Anderson and Hoffman.
Boy, you Steeler fans would be out of their mind to have a guy with a redhead mullet like that, Iowa product, if he ended up being the pick. All right, round 3, Malik Muhammad, who obviously has come in for a pre-draft visit. He checks a lot of boxes when it comes to potential Steeler cornerback, correct?
Yeah, he does, and he's really kind of changed my mind. Not him specifically, but when Pittsburgh signed Jamel Dean, I thought that corner's not going to be that high on the list of needs. They brought back Asante Samuel Jr. Ramsey could play nickel. You're going to re-sign Porter to a big money extension, but they've shown a lot of interest Pittsburgh has in cornerback, and that tells me they're going to take a corner earlier than I initially thought. And Muhammad is a baseline box checker. He's young. He's 21 until September. He's got good production. He's athletic. Reasonably good size with really good length for his height, 32+ inch arms on a 6-foot frame. So I think Pittsburgh wants to be really deep and strong at cornerback, and Muhammad is a sensible pick at 76.
All right. The others you consider there, obviously, Antonio Williams out of Clemson, Jacoby Thomas, safety, and Davison Igbinosun out of the Ohio State, correct?
Yeah, those were the 3. Williams for checking all the boxes. Thomas came in for a visit, just another corner with Igbinosun.
All right, the second, third round pick, Genesis Smith, a guy that we talked probably a little bit more about on the live stream on Monday night, because a lot of people were thinking, who are potentially some safety candidates that we had not talked a lot about that check a lot of boxes. And I immediately threw out Genesis Smith. I think he does check a lot of boxes. If they were able to get him at 85th overall, I think that would be quite a find for the Steelers. So I am on board with that selection there.
Yeah, he's been a true free safety. I think he was among the FBS leaders in free safety snaps, which is what I'm looking for, a little more than a strong safety type. I think it's just harder to find free safeties, and you have at least, Elliott, who could be back in 2027. He's under contract for that long. Maybe you re-sign Brisker after the year 2 is better as a strong safety more than a pure post safety. Smith is a good athlete. Questions about just tackling and kind of physicality, and does that truly fit Pittsburgh, which I think is a fair concern, but probably a day 2 guy.
I forgot to look at Genesis Smith maybe as being a potential guy coming in today, and not seeing anything on his Instagram feed here. All right, I'm on board with that. Let's see, the other guys that you have as considerations with that pick. I think Ted Hurst, Jalen Kilgore, and Demetrius Crownover, the tackle.
Yeah, Hurst, Pittsburgh showed some interest in him attending that Georgia State Pro Day. Kilgore's a nickel safety, kind of Everyone wants him to be the next D-man Worry, teammates with him last year, but I like Kilgore a little more at safety than nickel. And then crown over, they had Jari Evans at that Texas A&M Pro Day. I know that Beasonitis, the guard, likely late first round, early day 2 guy, gets all the attention, but crown over should be mentioned as well.
All right. Let's see. The last pick, 99th overall in the 3rd round that you have for the Steelers, Markel Bell, one of the few big tackles that the Steelers have brought in for visits and out of Miami. And yeah, I mean, this makes a lot of sense there. It does feel like at some point this team's going to draft a tackle in this draft, right?
Yeah, I mean, they've only brought in 2, so the evidence isn't incredibly strong, but they've certainly had a type of these big offensive tackles, and that could be a bit of a developmental type who played left tackle and would be in that mix with Broderick Jones and Dylan Cook. And so when you're 6'9", 350, you're in that Planet Theory situation of just not many guys built like him. He can kind of take his time, Bell can, to learn and develop and be coached up really well by James Campen and by Jari Evans. And so that feels like a good spot there at 99 for Markel Bell.
All right. Others you consider, you put Carson Beck in there, Daryl Jackson out of FSU, who's been in for a visit, and Skylar Bell, the wide receiver out of UConn.
Yeah, just basically visitors here with all 3 of those guys making their way to Pittsburgh at some point in the pre-draft process.
All right, round 4, the only first of 2 picks that the Steelers have in the 4th round. Marlon Klein out of Michigan, who we talked about recently after he came in for a visit. That checks a lot of boxes there. I am on board with that selection right there. I think very well that could end up being the selection.
Yeah, it doesn't need much explanation. Came in for a visit, has the size, the Big Ten pedigree, can block, more of a straight line athlete, but would be a really good number 3 tight end.
All right, you had Cole Payton, Harold Perkins Jr., and Tacario Davis as your other options considered there. The other pick in round 4, tell me about Chris McClellan out of Missouri. I haven't done a lot of work on him.
Yeah, he was in my mock draft previously, so he's the one holdover and carryover from the 2nd edition. He's got near prototypical size at almost 6'4", 313, good length. He had 6 sacks last year, so there's some run defense and size and pass rush, all those things kind of melding together at a good meeting point to kind of be a well-rounded pick for Pittsburgh in round number 4.
All right, let's see. Round 5, Caleb Douglas, the wide receiver out of Texas Tech, 6'3.5", 206 pounds.
Double dipping at wide receiver. I like Douglas a whole lot. He's not gotten a lot of buzz in this process. I turned on his tape. He's got a lot more quickness and twitch for a guy of his size, a bigger body receiver. He can make some really difficult combat catches. His highs are high. The drops are too frequent. His hands aren't trusted enough, but if he can be a little more secure in finishing some of those plays, this guy could be a real good kind of Z-type receiver.
All right. We'll round it all out here in the round 6. You've got Jaden Duggar, who was one of the local visits out of Louisiana Lafayette, inside linebacker, Penn Hills product. I think we did a little bit talking about him after his visit was announced. And then your 3 round 7 picks. Desmond Reed, the running back out of Pitt, got some return capabilities. You're destined to have a returner in your mock drafts this year. Joey Aguilar out of Tennessee, the quarterback there you've got in with the 2nd, 7th round pick, and then the last 7th round pick, you've got Aiden Hubbard, edge out of Northwestern.
Yeah, with Reed, local guy, undersized. I comped him to, I think, Tariq Cohen officially. That was Zero Lions comp, which I thought was excellent, but also kind of reminds me of Rod Stevens-Howling, former Pittsburgh Steeler, but Reed's natural receiver. I think he gives more in pass protection than you would think of a guy his frame. I think there were some decent reps on tape watching Notre Dame game. I thought he held up well, but there's real good punt return value with Desmond Reed. That would be his path to try to make the 53-man roster through special teams. Aguilar, the quarterback in the 7th round, wanted a scenario with a quarterback later. This is before Allar came in that kind of gave you additional sign that they're going to look towards quarterback earlier than round 7. But the thought process was kind of like I had with Chris Oladokun back in 2022, where you're going to draft a 7th round quarterback so you don't have to compete for him as an undrafted free agent, where Pittsburgh naturally loses out because those guys get partial base salary guarantees at $200,000, and Pittsburgh offers a $30,000 signing bonus, and just no one's going to sign with them if you're a quarterback who's got some options. And so the 7th round pick kind of lets you lock that guy in without having to go out there and try to fight for him in the chaos it is the post-draft process. Aguilar wanted to go back to school, got denied by the NCAA. He's got good size, played that up-tempo system in Tennessee, just too many interceptions, and that's the real big concern with him. Will that follow him to the NFL? And then Hubbard with the final selection, just a well-proportioned edge rusher to give you some depth there at 6'4.5", 259 pounds, had 17 tackles for a loss, 13.5 sacks over the last 2 seasons at Northwestern. So just additional depth on the edge.
All right. And once again, I should note, you can read all this on SteelersDepot.com. Should be easy to find. Alex Kozora 3.0 mock draft. Your final one will be out next week. My final one will be out next week. And everybody on the site, or a lot of people on the site, I think Ross, right? Joe Clark, Josh Carney. Who else is doing a final? Tom?
Ryan, I think Tom will be part of kind of the Depot crew. We'll kind of crowdsource that one, but we'll have obviously this time of year, a ton of mocks coming for you guys starting probably this weekend.
All right. I definitely see where your head was at, specifically with through the first 4 rounds of this latest mock draft here. And, obviously with Omar Cooper Jr. not coming in, probably mixes it up a little bit there, but easy to understand.
Should plug this, and we should have done at the top of the show. I'll be doing a live mock draft tomorrow, Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll be doing that on my YouTube channel, so just check that out. There's also a link on my YouTube channel if you want to join and draft with us, and Dave's going to be drafting as well. I think you're locked in there, and so we got a bunch of people that are going to join, and just should be fun to have it with more interaction and people than just going against the computer. So there's a link on my YouTube channel and the community post that you guys can find there. You do unfortunately have to sign up for the premium feature to draft with other people. It's $5 a month. So if you want to do that, you have to pay, unfortunately. We tried other free options. Nothing else really worked. Other websites just couldn't make it work in a way that was going to make it a fun experience for all of us. So just kind of have to make that cost, but it'll be fun if you want to come out and just watch the live stream too.
Yeah, and I think we've already got a few listeners from the live stream the other night that have signed up. And look, we really would like to see a lot of listeners sign up for this thing. And it only really will cost you $5 to do it, because you can cancel your membership after the mock's over with and all like that. And look, if you do decide to get in this, try to pick one of the. Let's make sure we fill up at least the teams that pick ahead of the Steelers at 21st overall. I imagine we're not going to get every team filled in here, so the computer will end up picking some of it. But it would be nice to have listeners, have teams with that own the first 20 picks in this thing. And if you do sign up for a team, obviously Alex is doing the Steelers, I'm doing the Ravens. I forget who else we have signed up at this point. But if you do sign up for a team, do a little bit of research, and the whole idea is to try to make this as realistic as whatever realistic is when it comes to these things. Because in the past, Alex has done these walk the mock live stream ones, and unfortunately there's been some trolls or whatnot in there that these things have gone off the rails. So the whole thing is here to try to make it as realistic as possible, and we feel like we might be able to accomplish that, especially if we get a lot of listeners to come in and sign up for this thing and partake in it. And it'll be, I think it'll be a little bit fun too.
Yeah, I think it'll be a good time. So we'll see you there tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. All right, Dave, where to from here? Let's just mention, I think the Steelers mentioned this earlier. They did mention this earlier this week. The coordinators will speak to the media on Friday at 11:30 a.m. So our Friday episode may be delayed while we kind of wait and hear what those guys have to say. We've heard a little bit from all 3 of those guys. They've done some sit-down interviews with the Steelers.com team website, but not talk to the media at large. That is, of course, OC Brian Angelico, DC Patrick Graham, and special teams coordinator Danny Crossman. So anything you hope to hear from those guys, Dave?
Oh, I can't think of, huge questions right off the top of my head here. I guess with Angelico, talk a little bit about how he perceives his role, and I think he's already done that to some degree. And I think, who did he sit down with? Missy
Matthews,
one of those other ones.
Or
there.
Rob King, I don't know, one of them.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm just ecstatic that we're going to be able to hear from those 3 guys ahead of the draft, to be quite honest with you. So hopefully there's some good questions from the media within those. Do you have anything on the top of your head you're hoping it gets asked?
No, just the more we learn, the better. These are really important people. These are guys who will be working the day-to-day operation of the team. Even the Angelica, who won't be calling the plays, will be organizing things and helping lead meetings. And McCarthy's going to be pulled in a bunch of different directions. And so Angelico's work is going to be really important to allow McCarthy to be at his best as a game day play caller. So we'll hear more about that and that dynamic, I'm sure. A little more, maybe Graham's philosophy, maybe something on some specific individual players. I'm sure some questions about, TJ Watt, the edge room. How do you make all those pieces fit? But just want to learn more from all those guys.
All right. I definitely look forward to that on Friday. And once again, our Friday episode might be delayed a little bit as we wait for that. Then that way give us something to recap throughout the show on Friday.
Dave Deshaun Elliott was on the Kim Hayward Not Just Football podcast Wednesday and offered an update on his health. And it sounds like he's just about ready to be cleared, which is awesome. He says he might work out during minicamp. Pittsburgh starting their voluntary process this upcoming Monday. And he gave more details on the extent of that terrible knee injury that he suffered last year, and he had a hyperextended knee and he tore his hamstring off the bone. He says, quote, they had to reattach that back to my fibula. They had to drill a hole through my fibula, put a pen through it, and reattach it. I was in a brace for 6 weeks. I had no weight bearing for 5. Those first 2 months were so hard. I've been hurt a couple times in my career. That was the worst pain when it came to getting my flexion back. And he later said, I thought my career was over, but he's on the mend. He's good to go, and that's awesome news for Deshaun Elliott.
All right, at the very least, we expect, it sounds like he'll be full go by the time training camp gets underway then.
Yeah, if not sooner. He's got to visit with the doctor, it sounds like. I'm not sure exactly when this was recorded or published Wednesday, but assumed pretty recently, and so we'll see if he's doing any sort of limited work during the voluntary minicamp, but if not, then maybe during the traditional OTAs and mandatory minicamp that will take place in later May and June.
All right, good news there.
Dave wrote just kind of a fun theoretical article. It's that time of year about any trade scenarios for the Pittsburgh Steelers with 12 picks. We expect them to not just stick and pick with all 12 selections, and so there should be some movement at some point. The question is just what those deals could look like, and we always get those trade questions, and they're worth talking about. I know why people ask. They're just always hard to give a good answer to because there's so many unknown variables involved, what the offers are, what the board looks like, who you've drafted so far, etc. But I wanted to outline 3 round 1 scenarios that make sense for Pittsburgh and what a trade could look like. There's one with moving down, one moving up, and then one moving back into the first round. The first scenario is moving down. A deal with Buffalo where Pittsburgh sends number 21 overall. They get back Buffalo's number 26 overall, so 5 spots down, and a 2027 third-round pick to get ammunition for next year. I know most teams will be very careful and unwilling to trade future capital, including, I'm sure, the Steelers, but for a Buffalo team that doesn't really care how good the quarterback class is next year, they have Josh Allen. That might be a team more willing to give up future capital, and Brandon Beane, as aggressive as it comes when for GMs moving up in the first round, he's made 3 move up in the draft in the first round over his tenure. He traded up early in the second round last year. That's a guy likes to be aggressive, go get his guy. Maybe a deal could be worked out.
All right, and I think currently, historically, the last time that the Steelers traded down in round 1 was when? Casey
2001, moving down 3 spots that year, yep.
Yeah, they were at 16th overall that year, and the Jets moved up to 16, and the Steelers went down to 19.
Who'd the Jets take with that pick?
Santana Moss.
How about that? There's a name. It worked out for both sides.
Yeah, definitely did, and I mean, that's let's see, 2000. That's 25 years.
Sure,
man.
but it's Omar Khan. It's
Yeah.
not Kevin Colbert
Yeah.
anymore. I think Khan is certainly more
Sure.
open and flexible than Colbert was, especially moving down.
You couldn't see them moving down any further than that, right?
It depends on what the offer is. If you have a
Yeah.
chance to get some future capital, that's in a draft class like this year that isn't great overall. If Pittsburgh could pick up a 27 pick, knowing they're unlikely to get any sort of comp picks, it's hard. I mean, again, it just depends on so many variables, but I think you have to at least be open to that because you know that you're not taking a quarterback this year. If you're not taking one in the first round, which you're not in this scenario, in which you're trading down, you sit there and say that's going to help us. It's not that one late third round pick next year is going to be the key to move up for a quarterback, but the more picks you have, the more ammunition you have, the more flexibility you have. it all helps.
All right, and you kind of theorize if indeed something was like that was to happen, it's probably because the board hasn't broken too favorably for the Steelers, and perhaps maybe they go down and draft Emmanuel McNeil Warren at that 26 overall spot, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's just one of many possibilities. It's less about who are they going to trade down and still get. It's, just does the deal make sense? And I think Buffalo's history is Brandon Beane likes to move up. They don't care about the quarterback class next year, so they might be more willing to give up capital. They don't have a ton of 26 capital that makes sense for them to trade now. So maybe a future pick makes more sense. And I just think it all sort of fits.
All right, the next one that you have is the Steelers going up to number 17 overall, where Detroit currently owns the pick.
Right. So 21 to 17. So the scenario is Pittsburgh trading number 21 and number 85, the middle of their third round picks, for number 17 and number 157, which is Detroit's fifth round selection. A similar move to 23 when Khan moved up 3 spots from 17 to 14 to take Broderick Jones. Would this be for a receiver? Could this be for Ioane? I think both of those things are plausible. Why Detroit? Well, it's a smaller deal. It's not some sort of massive trade up. And Detroit has only 2 picks in the top 117. And so to give them 85 overall, they have a big gap. They pick at 50, then not again till 118. And so that they would have 50 and 85 and 118 to kind of give them some more capital, not have that long wait there between the second and fourth round, I think, at 118. So that all seems to fit as well.
All right, and let's see. The third and final scenario that you have here is in the second round, right? Or
No, it's at the end of the first round.
includes a second round pick, though.
It does. It'd be a heck of a way to cap off night one for the draft in Pittsburgh, where Pittsburgh trades number 53 overall, the second round pick, and number 76 overall, the top of their third round selections, for the 32nd and overall pick and final selection of the first round with the Seattle Seahawks. So Pittsburgh making 2 first round picks at 21 and 32. Seattle only has 4 total draft picks this entire draft, and so that's certainly a good reason to trade down. Pittsburgh would come up, get in the first round, pick up the 5th-year option. Who would that be for? You would think maybe a quarterback. Obviously, they've not shown much interest in Ty Simpson, but it could be for a bunch of different players. It depends on what they take at 21. If they don't take a receiver, they could trade up for a receiver. They could trade up for a lineman, could trade up for any number of names and positions. And I think since over the last 4 years, the final pick of the first round has been traded three times. And so there's usually a lot of activity when it comes to that 32nd overall selection. And given that Seattle has very limited draft capital, I very much doubt they're going to stick at that 32nd overall pick.
All right. One thing coming in here from Aaron Wilson. He says Denzel Boston visited the Texans and the Commanders this week, and he has had visits with the Steelers, Ravens, Panthers, Jets, Dolphins, Commanders, Browns, and 49ers.
Been a busy man. He's been traveling all over the place. So he's certainly in first round contention. How those receivers break after Tate, still really hard to suss out. And Boston is certainly in that mix.
All right. You use the Draft Tech trade chart for this, right?
Yeah, I think that's just the old school. I'm not sure if that's a Jimmy Johnson one or not, but I use Draft Tech, who posts the trade chart. I don't think it's their own proprietary chart, but I think it's the more traditional charting. I know trade charts, there's a million of them out there, and evolved ones and new ones, but that's the one I used.
All right. Off the cuff here, trade me up from 21 to the Rams spot at what's that? 13?
Yes, the Rams pick at 13. So if we look at the trade chart, that 13th overall pick is worth 1,150 points. Pittsburgh's 21st overall pick is worth 800. And so there's a gap of 300 and, what is the math there? 450, I think, on that. 350? What is, now you're making me do public math, Dave.
Yep.
Embarrassing me out here. What is that? 350. Yeah, 350 on that. So Pittsburgh trades 21. They would have to trade probably their second round pick and a third rounder to make the math work.
All right. Could they do a combination of maybe a third and a fourth or something?
No. I mean, without a second, it's going to have to include the second in there, which is what happened when they traded up for Devin Bush. They gave up a 2. You can give me 350 points. I mean, I guess really you don't have to even trade the 350, do you have to trade a third? 370 is worth what the 53rd overall pick is worth. maybe you could just give up the second, but depending on how much activity there is for that 13th overall pick, you might have to give them something else.
All right, so you would theorize that if they're going to trade up, how what they're not going to give up a second round, but they're not going to come up off that 53. You wouldn't think to move up in the first unless they move way up in the first, right?
Um, you never know. I mean, it's just if you're gonna go up to 13, I don't know how you do it.
Without a
Well,
second.
I guess it would be you'd have to either give up your second or give up multiple thirds. 76 is worth 210, 85 is worth 165. It's like we talked about Dallas. I guess that is the to kind of correct myself. That's the path. Either give up just your second or give up probably two of your third round, definitely two of your third round picks.
All right. Where's what about to go up to Tampa Bay spot?
At 15, that's 1050, and so that's 250 points, and so you won't have to give up a second there. You probably give up one third round pick.
All right. What can you see this team going up to get Ioane?
Yeah, I can. I mean, who the heck knows? Again, how often do teams trade up for a guard, a position of lesser value? When they made the move for Broderick Jones, that was for a left tackle, which is a premium position. Even though, of course, you want a good prospect, you want your whole line to be solid. And so, my inclination would be more likely that he'd have to fall to them rather than Pittsburgh trade up. But they brought him in for a visit. The interest is there. The fit makes a ton of sense. And so you don't want to discount those things when you have 12 picks. It gives you more flexibility and you can be more aggressive than if you just had 7 picks for a team that won't trade. If they had only 7 picks, a normal 7, and for a team that's not going to trade 2027 capital, you become a lot more inflexible and a lot more. We got to kind of stand pat here. When you have 12 picks and all this ammunition on days 1 and 2, you can do a lot more.
All right. So we'll wait and see. All right, I appreciate that. I said the other night during a live stream I was hoping you'd do an article on some of the trade ideas, trade up or trade down ideas that you had. Especially after you had mentioned the one with Buffalo a few days ago there. So yeah, that I understand the theories behind all of them.
Yeah, I just wanted to give different ideas. One where you trade down, get future capital, which would be very valuable to Pittsburgh. One where you trade up and kind of go get your guy. And one where you make a really interesting two picks in round 1 moves. It's just all hypotheticals, but just kind of wanted to outline what those things could look like.
All right. Are you still at what did we say? The 9.5 total picks in this year's draft is kind of the over under of what this team will end up picking. I think you were over 9.5. I think I was at 9 under. Has your thoughts on that changed any?
No, I'll still sit there and say 10. I think 9 and 10 is going to be one of those two numbers, but I'll say 10 still.
Okay, I'll say 9 still. All right, we got anything else to get to as we await visitor number 30 here? And let's see. Before we get to some listener emails.
No, I think that's all I have. I don't currently see who the 30th visitor will be, so maybe it'll come in the next couple minutes. If not, we'll talk about it on the Friday show. So let's get to some reader emails and close out today's show.
All right, should note too, Hines Ward's going to be back in Pittsburgh for the draft, right?
Right. Not because it's in Pittsburgh, but because he wants to support Jordan Tyson, the Arizona State wide receiver. I think Tyson asked him to attend, and so I'm sure Hines had no issue coming back to Pittsburgh and coming back to the city in which he played in for so long. I'm sure he'll get a big round of applause if he's on TV. And Ward tried to clear up a lot of narratives on Tyson, some accusing him of not being tough. Ward pushed back and said this is a very tough guy. When he played through hamstring injuries, he kind of gutted it out when he didn't have to and potentially would have hurt his draft stock. So Ward is going to vouch for Jordan Tyson's toughness.
All right. Be good to see him back in Pittsburgh. All right. Let's get to some listener emails and close out this Wednesday show. I'm going to try to vamp just a little bit here. Maybe we'll get in visitor number 30 here. Paul Lutz writes in, hello, gentlemen. Fantastic job as always. Can you identify any defensive players in a draft that might have return value? It was almost an unwritten rule under Mike Tomlin that defensive players weren't used as return men, but we are in a new era. Could you see Mike McCarthy switching it up and using a best player available regardless of which side of the ball he plays on? And if so, are there any draft-worthy defensive players with return value? All right, that's a good question, and it will be interesting to see if at any point Mike McCarthy during his tenure in Pittsburgh would be open to using a defensive player as a return man.
Yeah, I'd have to check his history of how many, if anyone, did that for him during his Dallas and Green Bay tenure. I know that Turpin did a lot of that in Dallas, and he was a receiver, but it certainly could be one of those things that changes. I'd have to try to research it. I know when I wrote that long article on all the return prospects, I think they were all offensive players. The one name who comes to mind defensively is Lorenzo Styles Jr., who ran a blazing fast 40, had one kick return touchdown, I think a 100-yard return this past year. And so that would be, I mean, he didn't have a ton of return work. I think he had 5 or 6 returns, but he made that one pop. So that's kind of one name. There's no one else really coming to mind, though, Dave.
All right, none for me off the top of my head. I haven't been scouting defensive returners throughout this process. Chris Bailey writes in, thanks for the great off-season coverage. You really are the best in the business. Now on to my 2 questions. Draft visits. I know teams are allowed 30 non-local in-person draft visits and that they must be completed by the deadline of the 15th today. But if a player is popular, what is to stop all 32 teams from inviting that player for a visit? Are the players obligated to attend if they are invited, or can they decline the offer? And if a visit takes a day, including travel, could a situation be reached where there simply just wasn't enough time until the deadline to fit in all the requested visit invitations? I think technically if a player was able to fit them in a schedule, I don't think that's ever been done. I don't think I've ever heard of a player really having more than, I don't know, 15 visits or so, and maybe that's a little on the high side there. Uh, but look, I think teams try to schedule with agents and all, and can a player decline a visit? Absolutely, they can.
Sure. It's happened before, especially for top overall picks. Say, I'm a projected top 3 pick. You're picking at 11. I'm not going to go in and visit. I know Dion declined a lot of those visits way back in his day. So, yeah, there's no obligation for a player to attend. I think there also has been times where teams have just not been able to fit guys into the schedule because of other visits for the team, other visits for the player, and the deadline that looms. So, yeah, those things have happened before. Absolutely.
All right, Chris also, and he's from East Sussex, England, scouting who the other teams are likely to draft. In addition to Pittsburgh scouting other teams' draft needs, do you think Pittsburgh scouts other teams' Blues Clues to see who they really are zeroing in on? I ask as witness tell Pittsburgh which teams are likely to draft particular player or jump ahead of Pittsburgh for said player, and then Pittsburgh would be able to better maneuver themselves in the draft to avoid reaching unnecessarily with a pick or trade or being surprised by another team jumping ahead of them for a specific player. Look, I would imagine, that to some degree. Now, once again, you're not going to, I don't care, you're not going to have all top 30 visitors, I wouldn't imagine, for every NFL team for starters. And then, are you going to, but other than having your scouts that attend a pro day and then requesting and getting the attendance sheet, are you really going to know who all was where? And then are you going to be able to track dinners? You're just going to have to, the best way to do this is the obvious one. You have to stack your board the way that you see the board, potentially stacking specifically in the first round. We've heard the Steelers talk about some, and it'll be interesting maybe when we get to the pre-draft press conference about mocking the first round, other than, how they think it might go versus how Pittsburgh would mock the first round overall. I think to some degree you hear it. I would imagine that teams have a pretty good idea of positions and guys teams might be interested in, but it also feels like you could waste a lot of time trying to zero in specifically on who a team's going to draft and how that plays in. You've got to decide if you like X player and you really want that player, you're going to have to create a line on the board where we're pretty convinced that we got to go up and this is the highest that we would go up to take X players. So I understand the question. I think that kind of stuff that you're outlining there, Chris, is more the nerd stuff that me and Alex might try to do. That all it takes is one team jumping up that you had no idea would jump up ahead of you to draft. You could drive yourself absolutely crazy. And I have done, I do this annually to some degree of trying to figure out, well, this team, go look at the contracts. These two teams guards are under contract.
Yeah. You're basically Baltimore Depot lately. You've been on looking at Raven steps, right?
But it is a good question to ask. I don't know if I have a great answer other than to say I think you loosely try to stack a board. What teams generally, might be narrowed down to about 3 players, but even when you get down into that past the top 15, man, and the board really maybe starts to fan out a little bit more at that point. I don't know how much value and accuracy you could get past, let's say, top 15, right?
It's a really good question. Each team does it differently, and I can't tell you for sure how Pittsburgh does things, especially with a new head coach in and what ideas and what McCarthy's preferences. Pittsburgh used to do like full mock drafts under Kevin Colbert. He would talk about that, and they realized that became a time waste because it just was fruitless to try to predict what these teams are going to do because you just don't know for sure. And the draft trades and surprises always throw a wrench into everything anyway. And so what Pittsburgh transitioned to was just kind of ranking their board until they got to their pick. So this year you have the 21st overall pick. They would rank the top 21 players on their board, and whoever the top player was remaining whenever they were on the clock, that was their guy. And that's how I think they've been doing it more recently. I don't know if that's changed under Omar Khan, Andy Weidel. I don't know if that'll continue to change under Mike McCarthy. I believe that Andy Weidel stacks the board. That was his role in Philadelphia. I assume it's probably his role still in Pittsburgh as the assistant general manager. And so Weidel kind of sets the board. I don't know exactly how they proceed from there, but they probably do kind of more just set the board, and that's how they go off of it as opposed to a full mock draft. I'm sure they certainly have some guys that are responsible for getting a feel for what other teams are doing, who they're bringing in, who they're looking at. And you need to be aware of what the league's kind of intentions seem to be. But obviously, you can never really say for sure. And so the focus is setting your board, getting comfortable with the players that you want in your rankings evaluation. Everything else will take care of itself.
And then there's a whole Cole Strange thing, right? I mean, some of these things are just unpredictable.
What do you mean by when you say Cole Strange? For those unaware, you mean like just the oddball first round pick that no one really would have guessed? Yeah. The draft's always full of surprises.
All right. Thanks for the email, Chris. Let's go to Ryan Roberts from Tulsa. I read on my Steelers trivia calendar yesterday that University of Pittsburgh has produced the most selections in Steelers history, 46, and the Steelers have drafted more Pittsburgh Panther players than every other NFL team, and yet think about all the great Panthers they didn't draft: Dan Marino, Larry Fitzgerald, Tony Dorsett, Darrelle Revis, Curtis Martin, Chris Dolman, Russ Grimm, or Aaron Donald. We didn't get one of those Hall of Famers. Crazy, he says. So a little bit of
that's a good point.
Yeah,
Kenny Pickett.
Yeah. Bump.
Also, they reminded me, and just for those, I literally got a message about this yesterday. I've seen some people post it too. Penn State is not a local visit.
Right.
Dave, you went through your research. We found the original post and tweet that we had, I think back in 2018 from the NFL rule book that assigned the 3 local colleges, which we had correct: Kent State, WVU, and of course Pitt. And so Ioane coming in is not a local visit. He is a non-local that counts against the 30.
Yep, and Dinkins, on the other hand, who is a Penn State product, is from Wexford, so he is considered a local product.
Right, he's local not because he went to Penn State, but because he grew up in the area, in the metropolitan area is how they define local in terms of high school, locality. And so that's why Dinkins is local, but Ioane, where's he from? Is he from American Samoa, Ioane, or is that somebody else? I forget where he's from.
Where is he from?
Maybe it wasn't American Samoa. There was somebody I was looking up that was from there. That wasn't Maui Noah. But where is Vega from? What's his background, his story?
Let me see real quick what his hometown is. What was it? I'm getting confused here. It is. Where is his hometown?
Looks like Washington State. At least
Okay.
that's where he went to high school. Or no, he was
Okay.
actually. I'm sorry. He was born in American Samoa on the island, and then his family moved to Washington State somewhere, maybe around high school.
Okay. I don't know what they officially list as his hometown, though. Let's
Yeah,
what
you can check the
we'll
Penn State
we'll we'll
website.
we'll go to the Penn State website, and they have listed if this will load. Oh, come on.
They have Graham, Washington as his
Okay,
hometown,
Graham, Washington.
but he was born American
Okay.
Samoa, like Francis Marino.
All right, and also Drew Allar. He was he's not a local Pittsburgh kid either.
From
So
Medina, where's he from? He's from Ohio. He went to, I think it's Medina, right? Medina. So
all
he's
right,
it's kind of like that Big Ben, Ohio kid going to staying in the area, going to
all
Penn
right.
State.
And once again, Dinkins was a local Wexford. Look, I have, and I tweeted this out yesterday. I have linked to the PDF file from the 2018 bylaws, and if you like reading mumbo jumbo, that'll break down the whole geographical thing, and you'll learn the colleges that are considered local colleges for teams and all like that. So if you're looking for something to read between now and the draft, just find my Twitter feed, find the post that I did on that, and click on the link that should take you to the PDF file, and you can read learn everything you wanted to know and more about local visits.
By the way, I think, because we had gotten a question, I believe, on the live stream of the Monday show about do some colleges overlap? I think there were some overlapping colleges with team sharing. So just to correct that, I didn't think that was the case off the top
I
of
think
my head when we talked
Rutgers
about
is
it.
one of them that comes to the top of my head, isn't it?
I think there were teams that shared Rutgers. I think there were teams that shared Maryland, which makes sense. Like, I'm sure the Jets and Giants have the same schools because they play in the same place. So I don't know what that. I didn't check the whole list there, but there is some overlap in terms of the colleges.
All right, let's see. What else do we have in here? Worst case first round scenario from Taylor Carpenter. David Alex, with the draft nearing, I am in full-blown mock draft mania mode. I was wondering if you could take a minute to go through the worst case scenario for the board to break in the first round for the Steelers. Omar Khan has done an excellent job, in my opinion, the last few drafts, but I also think the board has broke extremely well for the Steelers in the early rounds through those years. After running a ton of mocks, I have a sinking feeling this might be the year for the first and possibly second round to break bad for us. Curious your thoughts of a nightmare worst case first round for the Steelers. P.S. I know Dave says to wait for the second round for a wide receiver, but in most mocks I run, wide receiver is wiped out pretty well by pick 53, and that's from Taylor in Athens, Ohio. All right, I would imagine, and based off of the pre-draft visitor list of 29 so far, I would imagine such the Steelers unable for whatever reason want cost too high, not be able to trade up. So that would be one of the first things I think that would have to happen for the Steelers. There's a guy that they like, that they really want to go up and go get, but can't for whatever reason. That's number one. Second, we at the top of the show rattled off, I don't know, 6 to 8 names, right, of logical based on historical pro day visits, pre-draft visitors. And I think we even included guys in there like Rodriguez and all like that. I would imagine getting into a scenario, let's say that Boston's off the board, Lemon's off the board, Vega's off the board. Help me out here of the other
Yeah, I
names.
mean, it's really just the top offensive linemen and top receivers. If they're
Right.
gone, that probably puts Pittsburgh in a more difficult spot. So if Ioane's gone, Fano is gone, Mekhi Lemon is gone, Cooper, Tyson, if those guys, there's a run ahead of them, and so they're left with a board that might look like
McNeil
Denzel
Warren.
Boston, McNeil Warren, Chris Johnson. You want to put in there. You've say Colton Hood is gone. Yeah, that's probably just in general. If there's a big run on receivers and some of those top linemen are gone, I think Pittsburgh's in a less than ideal spot.
Yeah, I would agree there. And then trying to take that worst case into the second round, specifically at 53, man, we'd be here for 4 days trying to. But yeah, how do you feel about my thoughts that Dave says to wait to the second round for a wide receiver? Where are you on that in that discussion?
I think there's merit to it. I've put together our receiver board by position. I'll have that article in a couple of days, and it helps you kind of frame what the draft class looks like, the texture of the draft class. And it's not super elite at the top with a lot of good depth. I mean, we have, and these are just our grades from the team that's put it together. We have probably a dozen grades in that 8.0 to 8.9 range. And so that kind of tells you that you have a good middle of the pack there. And that tells you maybe on day 2, you can wait and still get somebody that you have a high grade on that might not be too far away from a first round potential candidate that has a similar, but maybe only slightly higher grade. And so, yeah, I think there's certainly value in waiting on day 2, but it just depends what the board on at day 1 looks like.
All right, let's take one last one from our buddy Jeff Berg here. Great coverage pre-draft once again. Of the pre-draft visitors, what are the top 3 positions by quantity that they have brought in? For example, 5 wide receivers, 2 offensive line, etc. He says, I'm curious what the top 3 positions and how many at each of those positions were brought in. Might of course indicate where they're planning on drafting in the top 100. Well, Jeff, I mean, all you got to do is go look at our tracker that is now 29 of the 30, and then 3 local kids, I think, so far, in addition to there. So run down. Look, we know 4 quarterbacks right now, right? How many wide receivers?
I'll run it down.
Go through the numbers here.
And this is going to be just for the non-local. I'm not going to include the local kids in this since they don't count against the 30. And there's certainly a lot of value and correlation between the pre-draft number and what they target. At least that's historically what it tells you. So 4 quarterbacks, 6 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, 3 offensive tackles, 3 offensive guards, 2 defensive linemen, 3 off-ball linebackers, 4 cornerbacks, and 2 safeties, with that 30th player still outstanding. So I'll say it's more balanced than it has been maybe in past years. I know last year was very concentrated on defensive linemen and running backs. Those guys made up, I think they brought in 10 plus running backs and almost the same number of defensive linemen last year, and they drafted those positions first and with their first 2 picks. This year feels a little more chopped up. Receivers certainly still leading and will lead ultimately no matter who that 30th guy is, followed by quarterback and cornerback being the next highest with 4, then 3 tackles, 3 guards, 3 off-ball linebackers take the next positions.
All right. That should give Jeff his answer there. And once again, just go to SteelersDepot.com and type in pre-draft visit tracker, and it should take you to that if it's not on the front page, which we generally
yeah, it's on the front page. You just type it just tracker, which would be just to make sure you don't typo something, but it's on the top of the page right now.
All right. I think we got through some emails there. We're about an hour and a half into this, so we're staying on course there. We will be back on Friday. Let's give it one last look here on the Twitter machine to see if we can find out who the 30th visitor is. I'm not seeing anything there. All right. We will be back on Friday discussing the coordinator press conferences, the 30th pre-draft visitor, and what else we'll be talking about on Friday, Alex? That'll be the bulk of it.
That will. Probably anything else that comes in, but that's probably where our focus will be for the Friday show. I'm not sure if we're going to do are we going to do a roundtable before the draft, and then we'll do one after the draft. We're going to do a Depot roundtable.
We might try to either on Monday or Wednesday. I think would be a perfect time to try to get something together there.
Yeah, I think Monday probably is a good time to do that, so maybe we'll plan for that.
All right, that sounds good. So until then, you can follow me on Twitter at Steelers Depot. Follow Alex at Alex_Kozora. Follow the show at Terrible Podcast. Email the show, theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. If you like what we do and want to donate, SteelersDepot.com, hit the donate button. Also, if you like an ad-free version of Steelers Depot, hit the ad-free button. Follow the directions that way. Get a username and password, and you should be taken care of that way. So, until Friday, as always, thanks for listening to the Terrible Podcast with Dave and Alex.